I wanted to make an update video on my nylon wheels. So last time I was at the track, I was running a practice session and I did have one of the wheels fail on my B64. So I had crashed the car several times, but I wasn't expecting the wheel to fail. I mean, I had run the nylon printed wheels, different set, but I had run them, crashed a few times, didn't break. So you can kind of see on the failed wheel that the failure occurred right at the seam where the wheel essentially meets the bulk of the material. And it failed right on a layer line. I don't have a video of that practice session because my son didn't go and he wasn't there to catch the video, but this wheel did fail. Now, as a material, nylon is known for having strong interlayer adhesion. So that's why I was surprised this broke, because this is on a layer line. If you watch the initial video where I tested the nylon wheels, I crashed that car a number of times. I crashed it pretty hard where I thought I was going to break a wheel and did break one. Now this was a different set that I reprinted because I had made some modifications to the model based on testing that first set. And I'm curious if perhaps I left the nylon out too long. I think you may know that nylon does absorb moisture from the atmosphere, and it's possible that I left the nylon out and that's why I didn't get a good print on this set of wheels. I have the tire that I've unglued. I'm going to see if I can reuse it on another set of test wheels that I'm going to try, but this is the second time I've unglued this tire, so the insert is really starting to break down. I mean, the acetone doesn't really affect the rubber, but the insert inside the tire is affected by the acetone. So those are probably only going to be a practice set of tires. Now, what I'm thinking of doing is trying to print the nylon out of a dry box. So if I dry the filament out, you usually have to dry filament for about 6 hours before you can print it. And then I print it, do I get a stronger set of wheels? But that does kind of beg the question, the investment in equipment you may need to print out these wheels and have them work. So you're already going to need a decent printer. You're going to need a printer that's likely enclosed, and you're going to need one of the newer generation printers that can print a material like nylon. Now, if you also have to print out of a dry box isn't terribly expensive. They're about $50, but then you're really starting to question the ROI on printing these wheels yourself. You need a good amount of equipment to save some money on buying wheels, and then the question is, are you really saving any money? Now, I did want to talk about resin. I printed a few example wheels here out of resin. So the resin that I'm using is Sunlu high toughness resin. And honestly, I kind of think I might be taking an L on my idea of printing resin. So I have 3 example parts here. They're all the same model. The only difference is how they were oriented on the build plate. Without getting extremely deep into how a resin printer works, essentially a resin printer, whatever side you face towards the build plate is going to be your worst quality side, and that's just because the only moving part on a resin printer is the Z-axis. So if you ever watch a time lapse of a resin printer, you're essentially going to see a plunging motion where the Z-axis rises out of the resin as it is exposing a layer. What it's doing is exposing the layer, and then it pulls that layer off of the FET material and then puts the build plate back down to expose the next layer. So with that, whatever side you face towards the build plate is going to be the worst quality side. So this first example, one thing I want to show is this wheel almost failed. I think you can kind of see here where we have this division. I faced this wheel at a 45-degree angle to the build plate, and we see it almost totally delaminated. Now the print did succeed in the sense that I got the whole wheel, but this is not going to be usable. Even though we have decent sides inside and out, model almost failed. So 45-degree angle wheel didn't work. The next model that I want to look at, this model did succeed, Now I faced this side of the wheel, the outside, towards the build plate, and I don't know if you could see on the video, but you see the surface is very rough, and this is essentially because of the plunging motion. This keeps getting pulled off of the build plate, and this is off of the FEP, and this is facing the build plate. Also, when I washed this wheel, I didn't remove the support material before I washed it, so that's why you see some of this residue on the top of the wheel, because I washed it and I put it in the curing station. Inside of the wheel, if you can see, is nice. It has a good surface, and it has pretty good strength. As I squeeze it, I mean, it does deform, but you'll see on our control wheel, the control wheel also deforms. So you got a little kind of nasty surface, but not a bad print. This is the exact same model, but I flipped it. So this time the inside of the wheel was oriented towards the build plate, and this was facing away from the build plate. You see, you get a much nicer surface. About the same strength. The inside of the model is kind of where the nastiness is, but you may not care about this because it's facing inside. So much nicer surface on the outside, and overall same strength. Now if we take our example wheel, this is the associated control wheel. I mean, this wheel deforms as I squeeze it, and I do believe you want some deflection on the wheel. You don't want the wheel to break, you want it to bend. Now, the primary downside of these wheels is they are heavy. So you're probably not going to be able to see the scale the way I have the camera oriented, but the associated wheel weighs 17.46 grams. And if we take some of these example wheels, like this one, weighs 43.6 grams. This is very heavy. The other wheel also weighs 44.2 grams. And remember, the only thing that's different about these is how they were oriented. So you can, with a resin slicer, you can hollow it. So essentially, this is one big chunk of resin here. Now you can hollow the model, and you will be making a compromise on strength. I may print one of these hollowed and see how much of a difference in weight and strength that gives us, but these are rather heavy. Now, as an example, this is a tire and wheel off of my RC10 B6.4. The whole tire and wheel weighs in at 71.47 grams. So if I was to glue this setup and put it on one of my cars with a tire and wheel, you're at 94.9 grams on just one tire and wheel. So they are rather heavy. Resin printing. So another reason I say I might be taking an L on this is the limiting factor in terms of time on a resin print is how tall something is. Because remember, the only moving part is the z-axis. So depending on orientation, oriented basically like this wheel took around 4 hours to print. The wheel oriented at a 45-degree angle with support material was quite a bit taller, so it took 7 hours to print. After you print on resin, you have to wash the wheels, so I spin them for 20 minutes in IPA, and then I put them 25 minutes in the UV curing station to cure them before the resin is safe to handle. So quite a bit more time goes into this resin print. Material cost-wise, each one of these nylon wheels that I print for the rear wheel is about 76 cents to print one of these in material cost. My best calculation on this resin wheel is each wheel is about $1.50 to print. So I don't know that we're really saving any money here, considering we calculated out the cost of, say, an average wheel to be about $3.50, but you're involving a lot more time to make these wheels out of resin. So I may try a set of tires on the resin wheels, but I don't want to basically potentially throw away $25 to $30 on race tires. I did see some tires on A Main that were just over $10 for a set of 2.2 rears. I may pick those up. Those are not going to be something I race. That's obviously just going to be something that practice with, but it still should be a valid test. We're going to be on a racetrack. We're going to be driving it like a race car. It's just not going to be race tires. If I can do that, I'll post a video of it and we'll see how the resin wheels do. There is one other model that I may like to print. So it's one of the previous models from the past video. I can link them in this video as well. The thing with that model is it's very similar to the associated model where it has fins on the inside and it's got a thin extrusion layer when you print it on an FDM printer. So that made it weak when printed out of filament, at least the filament I tried. But printed out of the high toughness resin, that might actually be a viable model. So I want to try to print one of those. We'll weigh it up and we'll see how it compares to these wheels that are my design. So do a little resin printing and we'll come back and see what happens.